Imagine standing on a silent battlefield as the mist rolls over the jagged mountains of ancient Japan. The only sound is the rhythmic drip of rain hitting a lacquered helmet and the distant ring of a steel blade being drawn from its scabbard. You are looking into the eyes of a man for whom death is not a fear, but a constant companion. A man whose entire existence is governed by a code so strict that a single mistake could mean the end of his life by his own hand. This is the world of the samurai, the legendary elite warriors who ruled Japan for 7 centuries. They were more than just soldiers. They were the embodiment of a philosophy that still echoes through the halls of modern power. Their story is one of blood, honor, and a chilling devotion to a path known as bushidō. Before we journey back to the age of the shoguns and uncover the secrets of the warrior's soul, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel to join our community of history explorers. Your support allows us to continue bringing these epic tales to life. To understand the samurai, one must first understand the land that forged them. Japan is a country of extreme beauty and extreme isolation, a series of islands where resources were scarce and land was the ultimate currency. In the early centuries, the power of the emperor was absolute, but as the central government grew weak and decadent in the capital of Kyoto, the provinces fell into chaos. Local lords, known as daimyo, needed protection. They needed men who were not just skilled with a bow and sword, but men who were bound to them by an unbreakable bond of personal loyalty. This was the birth of the samurai. Originally, the word samurai meant those who serve. They began as provincial warriors, often coming from wealthy farming families, but they quickly evolved into a distinct social class with their own rituals, their own language, and their own lethal sense of duty. By the 12th century, the samurai had become so powerful that they effectively took control of the nation, establishing a military government known as the shogunate that would endure for hundreds of years. The true essence of a samurai was not found in his armor or his castle, but in the invisible set of laws he carried in his heart. This was bushidō, the way of the warrior. Unlike the written laws of the West, bushidō was an unwritten code, passed down through generations and refined in the heat of battle. It was a fusion of 3 powerful spiritual traditions. From Zen Buddhism, the samurai learned to empty their minds of fear and attachment, allowing them to face death with total calmness. From Shintoism, they drew a deep reverence for their ancestors and the sacred land of Japan. And from Confucianism, they adopted the rigid structures of loyalty and filial piety. A samurai without bushidō was merely a killer, but a samurai with bushidō was a guardian of civilization. The code demanded 7 core virtues. Integrity, or ji, was the cornerstone. A samurai had to be a man of his word. There was no need for written contracts in the world of the samurai. If a warrior said he would do something, it was as good as done. To lie was considered a coward's trait, reserved for those who were too weak to face the consequences of the truth. Then there was courage, or yu. But this was not the blind courage of a madman. It was the calculated bravery of a man who understood the risks but chose to act anyway because it was the right thing to do. Benevolence, or jin, was perhaps the most surprising virtue. Although they were trained to be killing machines, samurai were expected to be highly cultured and compassionate. They were the protectors of the weak and the patrons of the arts. A samurai who could not write poetry or perform a tea ceremony was considered incomplete, a brute who lacked the refinement necessary to lead men.
Respect and honesty followed closely. In the rigid hierarchy of feudal Japan, every bow, every word, and every gesture carried weight. To show disrespect to a social superior, or even a worthy enemy, was a grave offense. Honor, or meiyo, was the samurai's most precious possession. It was worth more than his land, his family, or his very life. A samurai's honor was not just his own, it belonged to his entire lineage. If a samurai was shamed, his ancestors were shamed, and his descendants would carry that stain forever. This is why the concept of death was so central to their lives. A beautiful death in service to one's lord was seen as the ultimate achievement. Finally, there was chugi, or loyalty. This was the absolute, unconditional devotion to one's master. A samurai was expected to follow his lord into the gates of hell itself, and many did. This loyalty was the glue that held the fractured provinces of Japan together, creating a society built on personal bonds rather than abstract laws. The physical manifestation of the samurai's soul was his sword. The katana is widely regarded as the finest bladed weapon ever created in human history. It was not just a tool for war, it was a sacred object. The process of forging a katana was a religious ritual, with the swordsmith undergoing purification ceremonies before striking the steel. The blade was made of thousands of layers of folded steel, creating a weapon that was incredibly hard, yet flexible enough not to shatter. A samurai always carried two swords, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi, a pair known as daisho. The long sword was for the battlefield, while the short sword was for close quarters combat and for the grim ritual of seppuku. To touch a samurai's sword without permission was an insult punishable by death. From the moment a samurai boy received his first steel blade, he was taught that his life and his sword were one and the same. But life for a samurai was not all philosophy and swordplay. It was a life of constant, rigorous training. From a young age, children of the samurai class were subjected to hardships designed to toughen their bodies and minds. They were made to walk barefoot in the snow, go for days without food, and witness executions to desensitize them to the sight of blood. They practiced archery from the back of a galloping horse, a skill known as yabusame that required incredible core strength and focus. They spent hours every day repeating the same sword cuts until the movements became instinctive, a part of their muscle memory. They were taught that in the moment of battle, there is no time for thought, there is only action. This level of discipline created a warrior who was functionally superior to almost any other soldier in the world at the time.
The battlefield was where the samurai truly shone. In the early days, samurai warfare was a highly ritualized affair. Before the clash of armies, individual champions would step forward, announce their lineage and their past achievements, and challenge a worthy opponent from the enemy side to a duel. It was a quest for individual glory and the chance to prove one's worth in the eyes of the gods. But as the centuries progressed and the wars grew larger, this ritualized combat gave way to massive, coordinated infantry movements and the introduction of the spear and eventually the matchlock rifle. Yet, even as the nature of war changed, the spirit of the samurai remained constant. They fought with a ferocity that terrified their enemies, often refusing to retreat even when faced with overwhelming odds. To die in battle was the greatest honor a samurai could achieve, and they welcomed it with a calm smile. As the samurai class solidified its power, they developed a unique culture that blended the martial and the aesthetic. They were the creators of the Zen gardens, spaces of profound silence and simplicity designed for meditation. They perfected the tea ceremony, a slow, deliberate ritual that celebrated the beauty of the present moment. They were the primary audience for No theater, a highly stylized and haunting form of drama that explored themes of ghosts, honor, and the transience of life. This duality of the cherry blossom and the sword defined the samurai. The cherry blossom was their favorite symbol because it was beautiful, delicate, and fell from the tree at the height of its beauty, much like a warrior dying in his prime. This acceptance of the fleeting nature of life allowed them to live with an intensity and a clarity that is rare in the modern world. The duality of the samurai's life meant that while they were prepared to take life at a moment's notice, they were equally prepared to forfeit their own. This leads us to one of the most misunderstood and haunting aspects of their culture, the ritual of seppuku. To the Western mind, the idea of ritual suicide is often seen as a tragic waste, but to a samurai, it was the ultimate act of self-determination. If a warrior had failed in his duty, lost his honor, or if his lord had died, he would choose to die by his own hand rather than live with the stain of disgrace. This was not an act of despair, but a cold, calculated restoration of the soul. The ritual was performed with extreme precision. The samurai would bathe, dress in white robes representing purity, and write a final poem, often reflecting on the beauty of nature or the fleetingness of existence. Then, using his shorter blade, he would make a deep incision across his abdomen. A trusted friend or fellow warrior, known as a kaishakunin, would stand behind him with a katana, ready to perform a swift decapitation to end his suffering. This final act proved that the samurai was the absolute master of his own body and his own fate. It was the ultimate testament to the strength of the Bushido code, showing that honor was indeed more precious than life itself. As the centuries rolled on, the stability of Japan was shattered by a period of near-constant internal conflict known as the Sengoku Jidai, or the Age of the Warring States. During this time, the central authority of the shogun had collapsed, and the daimyo fought one another for every inch of territory. It was a time of betrayal, shifting alliances, and incredible bloodshed. But it was also the era where some of the greatest legends of the samurai were born. Warriors like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged as visionary leaders who sought to unify the fractured nation through sheer military genius and political cunning. Oda Nobunaga was a revolutionary who embraced the matchlock rifle, changing the face of samurai warfare forever. He realized that a peasant with a gun could take down a samurai who had trained for 20 years. This marked a turning point in history where the traditional skills of the blade began to clash with the industrial realities of modern war. Yet even as gunpowder filled the air, the individual courage of the samurai remained the deciding factor on the battlefield.
But what happened when a samurai's lord was killed or his clan was destroyed? These warriors became ronin, literally translated as wave men. They were masterless samurai, wandering the countryside like restless spirits. Without a lord to serve, they lost their social standing and their source of income. Some became mercenaries, selling their swords to the highest bidder. Others became bodyguards for wealthy merchants, or even bandits who preyed on the very people they were once sworn to protect. The life of a ronin was one of extreme hardship and loneliness, but it also offered a strange kind of freedom. They were no longer bound by the rigid expectations of the court, yet many struggled to maintain their dignity in a world that no longer had a place for them. The most famous story of these masterless warriors is that of the 47 ronin. After their lord was forced to commit seppuku due to a court conspiracy, his samurai spent years living as outcasts, pretending to be drunks and gamblers to lull their enemy into a false sense of security. When the moment was right, they struck with surgical precision, avenging their master, and then collectively committing seppuku themselves. This story remains a cornerstone of Japanese identity, representing the height of loyalty and the tragedy of the samurai path. The samurai world was not entirely dominated by men. There existed a class of female warriors known as onamusha. These women were the daughters and wives of samurai, and they were trained in martial arts and strategy from childhood. While their primary duty was to protect the household and the castle while the men were away at war, many took to the battlefield themselves.
Their weapon of choice was often the naginata, a long pole arm with a curved blade at the end, which allowed them to compensate for their smaller stature against larger male opponents. One of the most famous figures was Tomoe Gozen, a female warrior who fought during the Genpei War. She was described as a rider whom neither the fiercest horse nor the roughest ground could dismay, and so dexterously did she handle sword and bow that she was a match for 1,000 warriors. These women proved that the spirit of Bushido was not a matter of gender, but a matter of will. They carried the same weight of honor and were just as prepared to sacrifice everything for their family and their name. By the early 17th century, the long wars finally came to an end. Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged as the victor and established the Tokugawa shogunate, a period of 250 years of relative peace known as the Edo period. During this time, the role of the samurai changed dramatically. With no more wars to fight, they became bureaucrats, scholars, and administrators. They traded their blood-stained armor for silken robes and spent their days managing the affairs of the state. It was during this long peace that the philosophy of Bushido was fully codified and written down. The samurai began to worry that they were losing their edge, that the comforts of peace were making them soft. To counter this, they placed even more emphasis on ritual, calligraphy, and tea ceremonies. They became the cultural elite of Japan, patrons of the haiku and the kabuki theater. Yet beneath the refined exterior, the spirit of the warrior remained coiled like a spring. They continued to practice their sword skills daily, preparing for a war that might never come, living every day as if it were their last. This era of peace was shattered in the mid-19th century by the arrival of black ships from the West. Led by Commodore Matthew Perry, the United States demanded that Japan open its borders to trade. This cosmic collision between a medieval warrior society and an industrializing superpower triggered a period of intense internal turmoil. Some samurai wanted to expel the foreigners and keep Japan isolated, while others realized that the only way to survive was to modernize and adopt Western technology. This led to the Meiji Restoration, a revolution that stripped the samurai of their privileges and abolished the feudal system. Suddenly, the men who had ruled Japan for 700 years were told they could no longer carry their swords in public. Their stipends were cut, and their status was erased. This was a profound trauma for the warrior class. Some transitioned into the new government and military, becoming the leaders of modern Japan. Others, however, could not accept the end of their world. This resistance culminated in the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, a man often called the last true samurai. Saigo and his followers made a final stand against the newly formed imperial army, which was equipped with modern rifles and cannons. It was a battle between the past and the future. The samurai, charging with their katanas against a wall of lead, fought with a desperate bravery that moved even their enemies. When Saigo was finally wounded and committed seppuku on the battlefield, the age of the samurai officially came to an end. But while their physical presence vanished, their ghost remained. The values they championed, discipline, loyalty, and the pursuit of excellence became the foundation of the new Japanese state. The bravery of the samurai was channeled into the modern Japanese military and eventually into the incredible work ethic that rebuilt the nation after the Second World War. Today, the image of the samurai is more popular than ever. We see them in movies, in video games, and in the worldwide fascination with martial arts. But the true story of the samurai is more than just action and adventure. It is a profound exploration of what it means to live a life of meaning in a world of chaos. It asks us to consider our own codes of conduct. What are the values we are willing to fight for? What is the honor we are willing to protect? The samurai lived in a world where every action had a consequence and every moment was a gift. They understood that the cherry blossom is beautiful precisely because it does not last. By embracing the reality of death, they were able to live with a fullness that few of us can imagine. They remind us that the greatest battle we ever face is not against an external enemy, but against our own fears, our own laziness, and our own lack of discipline. As we look back at the 700 years of samurai rule, we see a legacy that is both beautiful and terrifying. We see a level of dedication that is almost superhuman, but we also see the harshness of a society built on absolute obedience. Yet the core of their message remains universal. To be a warrior is not about the weapon you carry. It is about the state of your mind. It is about the decision to be a better version of yourself every single day. Whether you are a student, a professional, or an artist, you can apply the principles of bushidō to your own life. You can choose to act with integrity, to face your challenges with courage, and to treat others with respect. In doing so, you carry a piece of the samurai spirit into the modern world. The age of the sword is gone, but the age of the warrior spirit is eternal. The transition from the ancient warrior to the modern citizen was not merely a change in clothing or law, it was a psychological revolution. To understand the depth of this shift, we must look at the quiet years of the Edo period, where the samurai spirit was refined into a sharp intellectual force. During these 2 centuries of peace, the samurai were forced to confront a world without war. This was the era where the philosophy of the blade became the philosophy of the brush. They realized that the discipline required to master the katana was the same discipline required to master the mind. Many samurai turned to the study of Zen, seeking to find the same stillness in a tea ceremony that they once found in the heat of a duel. They learned that a true warrior is one who can remain calm in the face of a chaotic world, whether that chaos comes from a rain of arrows or the complexities of government administration.
This period of peace gave rise to some of the most influential writings on the warrior's path. Books like the Hagakure, written by Yamamoto Tsunotomo, offered a deep and often controversial look into the samurai soul. It famously stated that the way of the samurai is found in death. This did not mean that a warrior should seek suicide at every turn, but rather that by accepting the inevitability of death every single morning, a samurai could live his day without the paralysis of fear or the cloud of hesitation. When you have already accepted that you are a dead man walking, every moment becomes a gift, and every decision becomes clear. This mindset allowed the samurai to navigate the delicate politics of the shogunate with the same precision they used on the battlefield. It created a society where excellence was not an act, but a habit. But as the samurai became bureaucrats, a new tension began to grow. The merchant class was becoming wealthy, while many samurai, tied to fixed stipends of rice, were falling into debt. The rigid social hierarchy was starting to crack from within. The arrival of Western powers was simply the final blow to a structure that was already under immense pressure. When the swords were finally taken away during the Meiji Restoration, the samurai didn't just disappear into the shadows. They brought their incredible discipline into the new world. The former warriors became the founders of Japan's modern banking system, the leaders of its new industrial corporations, and the officers of its modern navy. The organizational skills that once ran a feudal domain were now used to run a global empire. This is the secret behind Japan's rapid rise from a closed medieval society to a world power in less than 50 years. The engine of this progress was the ancient spirit of the samurai, adapted for a new age. Even the way a samurai dressed was a statement of his philosophy. Their armor, known as yoroi, was a marvel of engineering, made of hundreds of small leather or metal scales, lacquered and laced together with silk cords. It was designed to be both flexible and incredibly strong. The helmet, or kabuto,
was often decorated with fierce crests representing their clan or their personal beliefs. Some featured the moon, others ferocious demons, or even simple dragonflies, which were admired because they only move forward and never retreat. Every piece of equipment was maintained with religious care. A samurai's appearance was a reflection of his internal order. If a warrior's armor was messy or his hair was unkempt, it was seen as a sign that his mind was also in disarray. This attention to detail, this obsession with perfection in even the smallest things, is a trait that defines the Japanese aesthetic to this day. The training of a samurai also included the art of the bow, or kyudo. In the early days, the bow was considered a more prestigious weapon than the sword. To hit a target from the back of a moving horse required a level of concentration and physical control that few could master. Kyudo was seen as a form of moving meditation. The archer does not just aim at the target, he becomes one with the bow, the arrow, and the goal. When the mind is perfectly still, the arrow finds its mark on its own. This concept of effortless action, or mushin, was the ultimate goal of all samurai training. It is the state where the self disappears and the action happens naturally. Whether in archery, swordsmanship, or calligraphy, the goal was to reach a point where there was no distance between the thought and the action.
We also see the samurai influence in the legendary gardens of Japan. A samurai garden was not meant for a quick stroll, it was a landscape for the soul. The carefully raked gravel of a Zen dry garden represented the ripples of water or the vastness of the ocean. The placement of every stone was deliberate, creating a sense of balance and harmony that invited deep reflection. For a man whose life was often violent and short, these gardens provided a necessary sanctuary. They were a reminder that even in a world of constant change and conflict, there is a core of peace that can be accessed through discipline and silence. This appreciation for the subtle and the quiet is the other side of the warrior's coin. The stories of individual samurai continued to inspire millions. Take the legend of Minamoto Musashi, perhaps the greatest swordsman who ever lived. Musashi fought over 60 duels and was never defeated. In his later years, he retreated to a cave to write the Book of Five Rings, a masterpiece on strategy and philosophy. He taught that the true warrior is one who understands the rhythm of all things. He believed that if you know the way of the sword, you can know the way of all professions. Musashi was not just a fighter, he was an artist and a philosopher who understood that the principles of conflict apply to every aspect of human life. His life was a testament to the idea that a warrior's journey is a lifelong quest for self-mastery. As we move further into the digital age, the samurai code might seem like a relic of a distant past, but in reality, it is more relevant than ever. We live in a world of constant distraction, a world where honor is often sacrificed for convenience and loyalty is a rare commodity. The samurai remind us of the power of a focused life. They show us that true strength is not found in the weapons we carry, but in the promises we keep. They teach us that every day is an opportunity to refine our character and to serve something greater than ourselves. Whether it is our family, our community, or a personal mission, the spirit of the samurai calls us to commit ourselves fully, without hesitation and without fear. The legacy of the samurai is a bridge between the old world and the new. It is a story of how a culture can hold on to its core values even as its external forms change. When you see a modern martial artist bowing before a match, or a Japanese businessman exchanging a business card with both hands, you are seeing the living shadow of the samurai. It is a culture of respect, a culture of excellence, and a culture that understands that the way we do anything is the way we do everything. The samurai may no longer walk the streets with their blades, but their heartbeat is still the heartbeat of a nation. This deep connection between the spiritual and the physical is perhaps most visible in the art of the Japanese tea ceremony, or chanyo. To an outsider, it may seem like a simple act of preparing a drink, but to a samurai, it was a rigorous practice of presence. In the small, quiet space of a tea house, even the most powerful shogun had to bow low to enter, as the door was purposely made small to force a posture of humility. Inside, all social ranks were temporarily set aside. The focus was entirely on the beauty of the imperfect, the rustle of the kettle, and the precise movement of the hands. This was a direct application of the Zen principle of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in things that are simple, aged, and modest. For a warrior whose life was often surrounded by the grand and the violent, this ceremony was a vital grounding force. It taught them that the same focus used to cut through an opponent's armor must be used to whisk a bowl of tea. If a samurai's mind wandered for even a second during the ceremony, he had failed his training.
But we cannot speak of the samurai without addressing the shadow side of their devotion. The absolute loyalty demanded by bushidō often led to moral dilemmas that would be unimaginable today. There are stories of samurai who were ordered to kill their own family members to prove their loyalty to a lord, or who had to watch their children be taken as hostages to ensure a political alliance. The burden of honor was heavy, and it often required the sacrifice of personal happiness and human emotion. The samurai was expected to be a pillar of stone, unmoved by grief or desire. This emotional suppression was the price of their power. It created a society that was incredibly stable and orderly, but also one where the individual was always secondary to the collective. Yet even in this harshness, there was a poetic understanding of the human condition. They believed that it was only through this extreme discipline that a human being could truly transcend their animal instincts and reach a state of grace. The architecture of the samurai era also reflected this constant state of readiness. The great castles of Japan, such as Himeji or Kumamoto, were not just homes, they were massive, complex machines of war. They featured hidden corridors, nightingale floors that chirped when stepped upon to alert guards to intruders, and murder holes through which boiling oil or stones could be dropped on attackers. The walls were sloped in a specific way called musha-gayashi, designed to be easy for a defender to climb, but impossible for an armored attacker. These structures were the physical manifestation of the samurai mindset, beautiful and elegant on the outside, but lethal and strategically perfected on the inside. They were symbols of the daimyo's power and the samurai's duty to protect the land. As the 19th century progressed and Japan moved toward industrialization, the samurai were faced with a choice: disappear into history or evolve. Many chose to evolve. They realized that the true sword of the modern age was knowledge. The same intensity they once brought to the dojo, they now brought to the study of engineering, medicine, and international law. They traveled to Europe and America, absorbing the secrets of Western power and bringing them back to transform their homeland. This is why, unlike many other traditional cultures that were colonized by the West, Japan was able to maintain its independence. It was the samurai who led the charge into the modern world, using the very tools of their potential enemies to safeguard their nation's future. They proved that a warrior's true strength is his adaptability. The end of the samurai as a formal class did not mean the end of their influence on the world's imagination. In the 20th century, the legendary filmmaker Akira Kurosawa brought the samurai to the global stage through masterpieces like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo. These films didn't just show action, they explored the deep philosophical questions of the samurai life, the meaning of duty, the tragedy of violence, and the loneliness of the warrior. These stories resonated so deeply that they were adapted into Western classics such as The Magnificent Seven and Star Wars. George Lucas famously drew inspiration from the samurai for his Jedi Knights, from their flowing robes and lightsaber duels to their strict moral code and connection to a mystical force. The samurai had become a universal symbol of the noble warrior, a figure that transcends borders and languages. In the modern corporate world, the principles of bushidō have found a new home. The concept of kaizen, or continuous improvement, which is central to Japanese business philosophy, is a direct descendant of the samurai's daily pursuit of perfection. The loyalty that Japanese employees traditionally showed to their companies mirrored the loyalty a samurai showed to his daimyo. While the modern world is very different from the battlefields of the Sengoku period, the fundamental human needs for discipline, purpose, and honor remain the same. The samurai remind us that whatever our sword may be, whether it is a pen, a computer, or a surgical tool, we should wield it with total commitment and integrity. To look at a samurai suit of armor today in a museum is to look at a silent witness to a vanished world. But if you look closely at the silk threads and the lacquered scales, you can still feel the energy of the men who wore them. They were men who lived on the edge of a knife, who found beauty in a falling leaf and dignity in a final breath. They were a reminder that a human life, however short, can be a work of art if it is lived with intention. The path of the samurai was not for everyone. It was a narrow, difficult road that required the sacrifice of almost everything. But for those who walked it, it offered a clarity of vision that is almost lost in our world of endless noise and distraction. As we conclude this exploration of the samurai spirit, think about the code you live by. In the quiet moments of your life, when no one is watching, what are the values that guide your hand? The samurai believed that honor is not something given by others, but something you cultivate within yourself. It is the choice to do what is right even when it is hard. It is the choice to be loyal to your principles even when it is unpopular. The age of the shogunate has long since passed, and the castles are now mostly tourist attractions, but the invitation to walk the warrior's path remains open to anyone with the courage to accept it. You don't need a katana to be a samurai. You only need the will to master yourself and the heart to serve a purpose greater than your own. This brings us to the final and perhaps most enduring mystery of the samurai, how they managed to balance such extreme violence with such profound tranquility. To understand this, we must look at the concept of zanshin, or the state of relaxed awareness. A samurai never truly relaxed in the way we do today. Even when drinking tea or writing poetry, a part of his mind was always tuned to the environment, ready for the unexpected. This wasn't a state of paranoia, but a state of total presence. In our modern world, where we are constantly distracted by screens and notifications, zanshin offers a powerful lesson. It teaches us that to truly live, we must be fully present in the here and now. If you are breathing, be aware of your breath. If you are speaking, be aware of your words. This total commitment to the present moment is what allowed the samurai to face death without blinking, for they had already lived 1,000 lives in the intensity of a single second. The transition of the samurai from warriors to scholars gave birth to a massive literary heritage. They didn't just write about war, they wrote about ethics, governance, and the nature of reality. One of the most famous examples is the Hagakure, which was dictated by a retired samurai named Yamamoto Tsunetomo. He lamented that the warriors of his time were becoming too concerned with money and comfort. He believed that the true spirit of the samurai was found in the purity of action, doing something simply because it is right, without regard for the reward or the outcome. This philosophy of selfless action became a defining characteristic of the Japanese psyche. It is why even today there is such a high level of craftsmanship and service in Japan. Whether it is a chef preparing sushi or an engineer designing a high-speed train, there is an invisible samurai spirit at work,
a dedication to doing the job perfectly, not for the money, but for the honor of the work itself.
We must also acknowledge the samurai's relationship with nature. Unlike the Western tradition, which often saw nature as something to be conquered, the samurai saw themselves as a part of the natural world. They observed the seasons with a religious devotion. The arrival of the cherry blossoms in spring and the changing of the maple leaves in autumn were moments of national reflection. They saw in the seasons a mirror of their own lives, a time to grow, a time to flourish, and a time to let go. This connection to the earth provided them with a sense of perspective. Even the greatest shogun was small compared to the majesty of Mount Fuji. This humility allowed them to maintain their discipline even when they held absolute power over life and death. As we look at the ruins of the great samurai castles today, we see more than just stone and wood. We see the remnants of a civilization that tried to solve the ultimate human problem: how to maintain order and honor in a world that is inherently chaotic. They did not always succeed. There was cruelty, there was unnecessary bloodshed, and there was a rigidity that eventually led to their downfall. But in their pursuit of the perfect way, they left behind a roadmap for human excellence. They showed us that a human being is capable of incredible self-control, and that a society can be built on the foundations of mutual respect and loyalty. The death of the samurai as a class was not a failure, but a final act of service. By stepping aside and allowing Japan to modernize, the samurai saved their country from the fate of many other nations that were crushed by the weight of their own traditions. They proved that true loyalty to one's country sometimes means letting go of one's own identity for the greater good. This final sacrifice is perhaps the most samurai thing they ever did. They exited the stage of history with the same dignity and calmness with which they entered a duel. Now, as you go about your day, carrying the heavy demands of the modern world, remember the image of the lone warrior standing in the mist. Remember that you too have a blade within you, your mind, your will, and your integrity. You don't need a battlefield to prove your courage. You prove it every time you stand up for what is right, every time you keep a promise that is hard to keep, and every time you choose discipline over ease. The world has changed, the armor has rusted, and the katanas are in museums, but the path of the warrior is still there, waiting under your feet. It is a path of hard work, deep silence, and unyielding honor. The story of the samurai is your story. It is the story of the human spirit's refusal to be ordinary. It is the story of our capacity to turn our lives into something legendary. As the cherry blossoms fall and the wind whispers through the bamboo groves of memory, the samurai remind us one last time: live with honor, die with dignity, and in between, make every moment count. The blade is yours. The path is open. Walk it with the heart of a warrior.